would both the SLP and the LP UK both support decriminalisation of, say, cannabis? Because today is the day that Canada legalised recreational cannabis.
So Scottish Libertarian Party policy is that all the drugs would be legalised. It's not an endorsement of them by any means, but I think it's a hell of a lot safer to buy something from, cannabis is considered relatively benign, but for all drugs, I think it's a hell of a lot better if you can buy it from Boots and you can certain of the purity and the content of things, than if you're having to buy it from some scale-fed in the street corner.
Well, our policy is much the same, other than that we don't want it taxed.
To what extent would you implement like a Second Amendment kind of legislation, if like in libertarian party in this country?
That's the right to bear.
Your country.
Is that the right to bear arms?
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, it's not one of those things that it's a shame if you have to explicitly state it. You have a right, everybody has a right to self-defence. I always say that argument I make to people, particularly if it's women, because it's a good one to make with women who are pro-gun control, is to point out that aside from firearms, which use explosive force, all other weapons that you use require your own physical force. So your hands, or if you're using even a knife or anything else like that, in a life or death situation, or a struggle or an attempted rape, and you're attempting to defend yourself with something other than a firearm, then a man trying to overpower a woman has an advantage. Firearms level the playing field, and I don't think that any woman should have that right to defend herself taken away from her. And I think it is a shame that you may have to have something explicitly enacted, like a Second Amendment to guarantee it. And if needs be, the Scottish Libertarian Party would do it, but I think it's one of those things it's more a case of what rights you should be sitting at, what rights the government can have, what powers the government can have, and an assumption that everything else is with the people, and human ability to exploit. It shouldn't be a case that everything is banned for the civilians, except that which we've got a specific amendment for.
For the LP UK, our policy is that we want to introduce a Swiss-style constitution, and I would recommend anybody reads that. It's in English, it's available online. Although Jefferson actually wrote the benchmark as far as brevity and good constitutions are concerned, the Swiss constitution is much more geared up for our national situation, where we've got partial devolution, where the poor old English have got nothing. In terms of self-defence, as a Jeffersonian, I would actually advocate that every able-bodied person over the age of 16 through to 60 follows the Swiss example, receives militia training, and is required to keep a heavy weapon at home with ammunition. At the moment, we've actually got something like 144,000 policemen and less than 82,000 trained troops. Having said that, I don't think it's a very good idea to introduce that overnight. So one of the things that I advocated that's a cultural change, that we've got to move to that. And people are terrified of the weapons, but people are being stabbed, people are being acid thrown over, people are being run over by trucks. So at the end of the day, as far as the LP UK is concerned, you have a fundamental right to self-defence. And the one thing that I advocated at conference 2 weeks ago is the immediate repeal on the ban on pepper sprays, especially for women. In Poland, and I think it's the Czech Republic, they are actually dished out for women free of charge, and quite rightly so. I can't think of anything more ridiculous than having something that is actually going to disable a terrorist wielding a knife that long. And if you're a senior policeman, you just go and lock yourself in your car, you're all right, you've got your stab vest on, there's going to be no problem, you can drive off. But there were people in pubs there and the rest of it, and the only thing they had to defend themselves was throwing chairs at people. Now, I don't know anybody else's, I don't know whether you have the same in Scotland. I go down to London quite a bit, and I just hate it. Is you're on the train, you're on the tube, and this little announcement comes back, reassuring everybody, if you see something, like a bloke with a knife or a stick of dynamite and the rest of it, report it to the nearest policeman. See it, sort it, and dealt with it. I can't remember. It drives me nuts, because basically what happened, that these guys were actually brought down. They were stabbing people after the London Bridge incident. They were brought down by people going on from Millwall, and they just took them out with chairs and whatever was to hand. Now, a former member of the SAS who actually took part in the Iranian siege has just said that is a complete lot of nonsense, what the Met are telling you, and what Sadiq Khan are actually advising people to do, is they're saying that offence is the best way of defence. And literally, they advocated the next best thing to not having pepper spray is to grab the nearest fire extinguisher and open fire on them that way. Once you blind them, they're at your mercy. Now, at the end of the day, in terms of the Constitution, we would not say you have a fundamental right to carry nuclear weapons or a heavy machine gun or anything like that. We would say, quite specifically in our Constitution, you have a fundamental right of self-defence. That means if somebody crosses your threshold after the hours of darkness, it doesn't matter whether you just blow them to bits or whatever. As far as we're concerned, people in this country should not be going around frightened of people invading their country. Criminals don't care about gun legislation. I know where I can acquire a gun quite easily. And 90% of these people just hire them for an evening thing and shoot somebody. I come from a small town in the East Midlands called Northampton. One of my friends I've known for about 30 years, she's a paramedic there. And she was just regaling me with some of the things that she has to go out and attend to. This is Northampton, tiny little country town. She was called out to a shooting, a drive-by shooting, where the guy was actually executed at the side of the road, Upton Way, near where I used to live, and he was filled full of 8 bullets. Criminals don't care. So at the end of the day, we've actually got to turn the balance back to the protection of the individual. And I'm sorry for this actually frightens people, but at the end of the day, we are living in a far more violent society than we were 40 years ago.
Oh, I remember reading somewhere that a university in America conducted a study about how American universities in which allowed women to hold mace or pepper sprays like devices, or what they call it, conceal and carry and conceal.
Concealed carry.
Yeah. Women who were allowed to hold that at universities in America had experienced less sexual assault and less attempted rape on campuses at universities than universities that completely banned, say, just pepper spray at least, rather than. Because I'm comparing this compared to the American culture when compared to the UK culture. But even then, in the US, universities had those laws in place, had experienced like a significant, I can't remember how much it was exactly, but a significant decrease. Do you think that's part and parcel of the exact things you've talked about? How I'm not going to go around trying to go out clubbing, say if I'm a predator or whatever, going to go out and try and sexually assault a woman if I know that woman might be carrying a firearm or mace me in the face.
Well, and one of the great things about those laws, carry the weapon, the possibility that you do is enough of a deterrent sometimes, or the possibility that another bystander or good Samaritan will come along and see you and will themselves be armed. This country, it's not going to happen, right? You're completely safe. If you're a criminal with a knife, you can rest assured the person you're going to attack is completely unarmed, so is every other bystander.
I live in a tiny village in Somerset. We had an incident there where, and this is the sort of level of crime that we actually get in Somerset, is that there was a bit of an argument about this bloke's seat. You were sitting in my seat, you are. And he said, I'm going to sit here, and it's packed in here. So this bloke went off and came back with a shotgun. And he walked through the door, and unfortunately for him, he was jumped by about 4 people. Shotgun went off, blew his thumb off, and blew a hole in the floor, which they've now got a plaque on here, the famous shooting of Christmas, whatever. So it's a tourist thing. But he was dragged outside. He accidentally fell over the pavement and hit his head 6-7 times, and then accidentally fell against the wall. The first person that turned up was a journalist from Bristol, 14 miles distance, followed by the paramedics, and then the paramilitary SAS police turned up 50 to 60 minutes later, all jumped out of their thing with all their weapons. Like, anybody seen the Rick Mail film, Whoops Apocalypse, where they've actually got the they jump out of the van and they're throwing stuff all over the place. All right, my lads. They'd sealed off the street and the rest of it. It was all over. It had been over an hour beforehand. So at the end of the day, the gun was actually kicked across the road under a bus station, but the people who were actually assisting the bloke who had accidentally hit his head on the pavement 3 or 4 times, 4 or 5 times, and then slid down the wall, they were all arrested and kept in cells overnight. Whereas they should have been given a medal because there were children in that pub. And at the end of the day, this is where it comes back down to the police really, really don't like competition.
Yeah, this is with regards to upcoming elections. So there's a Scottish election coming up in 2020, I believe, and I'm not sure when the second round of English local elections are happening. May. Right. So is there a strategy on both the Scottish Libertarians on the aspect of getting into Holyrood? And if you did get into Holyrood, would you, in the situation where there is a hung parliament, work with a potential Conservative, Labour or SNP government to get your positions in there? And with regards to the UK level, is there a strategy to get MPs or councillors in as a result of the publicity gained by Bill Etheridge MEP moving towards your party?
Moving towards it, John.
Yeah, joining your party.
I love saying that. Well, I'll let you.
Well, I think I'd love to be in a difficult situation of deciding which party our MSPs would support. I don't think we're going to have the luxury of that anytime soon, I'm afraid. Our current strategy is to try to maximise our profile and grow the party. Because of the deposit rules, it makes putting up candidates across every seat pretty expensive, because if we don't get 5% of the vote, I think it is,
Do you want me to assist with this answer?
Yeah, what's the percentage?
That is 5%, but we do currently have enough candidates listed to cover every region in Scotland. And it's 2021.
So we've got a regional list, but no constituency candidates. I think last time we had one, we put one constituency
I
candidate.
think we've got 8 confirmed so far, as well as the regionals covered. So we're doing pretty well.
Well, that is progress, but I think our strategy is just to try and grow the party and generate publicity. Aside from that, we are trying to pose the questions, get ourselves in a position to pose the questions to politicians, to make them answer questions from the right wing. The electorate is actually more right wing than political parties, but the fact is that the political parties, if you look at the Conservatives, are the main one, and they're supposedly in the right wing, and frankly they're just socialist anyway. But they don't have to worry about defending from people taking their votes to the right. We've rather conservative UKIP, and in Scotland, they've not even had that to worry about. So they don't have to defend the free market or anything. Instead, they try and out-Labour and the SNP by offering free stuff. And one of our strategies, one of our goals, is to get ourselves in a position to ask the awkward questions and to pose more libertarian questions and make that viewpoint known, so that they have to address it. And that, rather than us getting politicians in Parliament, I think is more likely to bear fruit for the Scottish Libertarian Party at the moment.
From our point of view, we're a bit more pragmatic. We know that the £500 deposit is a tax on democracy. We want to see that done away with. But literally, we just aim to have enough MPs that actually guarantees that we actually get a slot on TV. Not MPs, candidates. And it's as crude as that. We know we're not going to get on under first past the post, because people don't vote for a candidate, they vote against the other side. It's as crude as that. Like in my part of North Somerset, everybody votes Conservative, whether they agree with them or not. They'd rather not the Labour Party get it. So yeah, that's that's a dysfunctional parliament. So literally when people say, oh, we've got a representative parliamentary democracy, well, A, it's not a democracy, B, it's actually sending people there who are low quality and are false pretences. So we're just very pragmatic, and we actually take the view that if UKIP can actually change the course of British history without getting one MP in 25 years and spending 50 million quid over that period, and could change it by forcing through, that's where we need to be placing ourselves, is actually being a fountain of ideas. Yes, we will get councillors, we have got councillors. I've been a Libertarian councillor in Cleveland, in Somerset. But at the end of the day, that's because you can get local issues dealt with and actually making people realise, you know, we're not all Nazis. I mean, Bill Etheridge did his very first interview after becoming a Libertarian MEP, and the BBC just went full, you're a racist. And just developed the whole programme to, you're a racist, aren't you? And you know, I think we were mentioned 3 times. But when you've actually got, and this is what I was actually going about before, about these courses, all these broadcasters are going to go on, is at the end of the day, the agendas keep shifting. Now that's either a good thing because they're frightened, or it's a really bad thing because they're actually going to stop any of us that are, and I don't like using the word right, other than we're right. They're just going to make sure that only if you're in a collectivist, statist sort of deposition, like, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm going to give you another 20 million. Well, where does this money come from? And we're now at a position now where the national debt, since we, I mean, they were saying we're getting the deficit down. No, that's just the difference between current account budgeting. I'm treading on your area here. But the rest of it, the national debt is now at 1.92 trillion. And we're not going to pay it. My unborn grandchildren, great-grandchildren are going to pay it. I think that's immoral. It's evil. It's like having a credit card and then going crazy on it, and then somebody who's not born yet saying they'll pay it. It's immoral. But then again, as I actually said not too long ago, I think it was just before the conference, government is a criminal activity. Just saying.
Considering that we live in a trust-based society, but also freedom of expression is an important aspect of liberty, what are your opinions on a banning of the burqa?
I'm against it. I mean, if you go back to when John Reid was Home Secretary of the Labour government under Tony Blair, I do believe he's a big Celtic supporter. And I really would like to see the situation. I don't support either of the 2 Glasgow giants, but I don't really would like to see a situation where a Celtic supporting Home Secretary is banning Rangers tops or vice versa and telling people what to wear. I think it is an attempt to, it's a very bad attempt to deal with an underlying problem. And I'm trying to police what people wear, it just seems ridiculous to me.
Nothing to do with this, by the way.
UKIP recently put forward a manifesto pledge about wanting to privatise the BBC. Is that something, I really hope you'll say yes, is that something both the parties would?
You'd abolish.
You'd abolish, okay.
Yeah.
It's too tainted.
I only asked because I lost my faith in the BBC with the whole Jimmy Savile scandal, the fact that they could protect certain people for so long and knowing what they did. The fact that public money, or whether any money went into that, let alone public money, went into protecting that. I think some of that may have gone towards my feelings, but would you completely just, I know I said private, but you just
the first step would be to take the charter away from them, which they continually breach, and I said that in my earlier talk. They just breach it on a daily basis, they don't care. Where was the impartial sitting there talking to our MEP? I love saying that. It's just saying, you're racist, you're racist, you're racist. And literally, when they had, they interviewed some Rent-a-Gob Labour MP, Jess Phillips.
Oh.
Yeah, and she just said, he's a bit of a racist. Well, you're getting cracked. So at the end of the day, but they actually, when they did the Twitter lead-in to his interview for 2 days beforehand, they said, Jess Phillips MEP said he's a bit of a racist. Now, that's not impartial, and that is in their charter that allows them to tax people and to knock on people's doors and threaten people with fines and stuff.
Isn't Jess Phillips the MP who also said men's rights issues aren't a real
Yeah, so
thing?
men committing suicide, the greatest cause of death under the age of 45 for men is suicide, and she just thought that was risible and laughed all the way through this thing. She's a disgrace.
Yeah, I think we would go down a similar route. I mean, but I think the way to solve the problem.
I would flash BBC Scotland immediately.
I think the easiest way to go about it is just to make to take away TV license, and make anybody who wants to pay for it, and very quickly it'll go bust, because people ain't going to pay for the crap they're producing and for the biased reporting and broadcasting that they do. So it's just not be able to support itself.
Following on from that, the BBC recently made a statement that it's not going to invite people who don't believe in climate change onto panels about climate change because there's so much evidence for climate change. Do you think it's fair to ban debate on objectively proven things like that?
Well, I think it's quite pro quo, because we in the Scottish Libertarian Party are not intended to allow anybody on any of our panels who believes in the BBC. So, it's just another. That's a bit of an issue to do with the fact that they're supposedly a public service broadcaster. If you or I wanted to set up a broadcasting corporation, we could put out whatever angles we want, and there wouldn't be an issue with it. It's because they supposedly have to be neutral and objective that all these problems arise. And that's really where the problem lies. Whether it's climate change or anything, you're going to have these issues constantly arising. You see it with Brexit as well, where they cannot take a balanced position on it. And yeah, it's untenable for the BBC to exist, simply because of, well, that's one of the reasons, but plenty of other flaws with it, but that's one of the reasons why it just should not exist.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. I've seen on the news that something like 2,000 people have been persecuted for their social media posts in this country. Actually, how widespread do you believe this criminalization of social media posts is? They say that they criminalize it because it's offensive. Like, do you believe that should we be afraid that the police is going to turn up? Is going to show up?
Can I just ask that, when you're saying they, is that say like Facebook? Are they criminal?
Yeah, like Facebook,
or, no, as a corporation, or are you saying the police?
No, I'm talking about the government, the police.
Right.
Yeah.
There's been plenty of instances where the police have been knocking on doors. I think the most recent incident was where a 68-year-old woman got the police hammering on the door because of something she'd actually asked in the royal parks in London. It's not permitted to pray in the open, and there was something about 400 Muslims actually praying. She went up to a policeman and actually said, "Are you going to stop this, because this is illegal? There's the park regulations there." And he just told her to go away. And the next thing, about 11 o'clock at night, she had 3 policemen banging on the door for offensive behaviour. And literally she wouldn't let them in because a 68-year-old woman, she couldn't work out of their word. And the police advise you, don't let anybody in your house after dark because you don't know who they are. So once she actually let them in because they were making such a racket, she was actually fortunate that she was filming it on her phone and she was happy. They burst through the door and arrested her for resisting arrest by not opening the door. Now, that to me is where you need a constitution, and you actually need these bodies to be accountable. Not, let's jump in our squad car and go and have a bit of fun around the block of flats around the corner. Literally, the police should have been able to go to an ombudsman that's working under a constitutional ombudsman, say saying this is illegal, this is ultra virus. I remember this from my days. And this is illegal, and those policemen should have been suspended immediately, if not losing their jobs, and the police authority fined heavily. Because, this is where you're actually parting from the police and the people and the people and the police. Now, going back to the other bit where it's actually saying about corporations, having been banned twice myself, it's their platform, they set the rules, we have to respect that. So I have to respect their rules if I want to use their platform. So, but the problem then is when you've actually then got a crossover from the state saying, come on Facebook, just get this in, stop all these people doing this. It's the crossover, and this is the corporate state, which, as Mussolini called it, it is the ideal fascist state.
In answer to your question succinctly, yeah, you should be concerned about having a knock on the door from the police because of what you post. It's quite clear that occurs. Jokes about, from one disgruntled customer of Robin Hood Airport saying that he was going to blow it up. That went all the way through the court. He was prosecuted and persecuted for months over that until
I think it's 2 years.
Until finally someone saw a reason and said, this is nonsense, why is this before my court? But it was so obviously not real, but yet he was prosecuted for that. It was a case of a girl who, I think someone had died, and their favourite artist was Drake or something like that. And she quoted some lyrics which on Facebook wall as a tribute, which included the N-word, and she has been prosecuted and fined £800 for that. So yes, if it gets to the stage where you cannot repeat the lyrics of music you listen to without facing prosecution, then yes, you should be concerned.
Which N-word? I just want to hear you say it.
So you mentioned the size of the national debt. How do you propose to go about fixing this issue?
We've actually, if you'd like to go onto our website, you'll be able to see that there. I proposed, and it was accepted, now we're rethinking this at our January conference, is we actually introduced a tax very much on the line of the reunification tax in Germany, where they taxed everybody to pay for the cost. I think the tax was time limited to actually pay for infrastructure into East Germany that had been neglected under 50 odd years of communism. That was party policy for a while. It's now under review because the party didn't like tax. So even though I was having a poke at Gordon Brown and saying, everybody's got to face up to the fact that we owe £53,000 each to pay this off. Now, the big debate at our conference, as Steph and Stephen actually tell you, is, part of it is, do we just actually say nothing to do with us, just write it off? The Russians tried that in 1919 and came a cropper for nearly 70 years, because nobody would lend money on the international markets. Or do we pay it off? And overwhelmingly, the vote went to pay it off. Now, the only way that I can see we can pay it off is actually introducing either a sovereign wealth fund to actually reduce it, stop going to war with people at the Americans' behest every 5 minutes, and start reducing this and actually getting rid of what we have to pay in interest every year of £53 billion. That's the true cost of servicing this debt, and it's growing.
So,
could I make a suggestion? Rather than introducing a tax, why don't you just reduce the size of the state?
That's the other part of the policy, which I didn't quite get around to doing. It's just to have a smaller state, and part of this is breaking the power of Whitehall.
of course, you could always not have a tax, but instead have a national contribution or a levy or some other word which means tax, but we shouldn't call it that. Like national insurance.
There was a double edge to this. By calling it the Gordon Brown tax, as everybody remembered never to vote for the Labour Party ever again.
But in just picking up on what Andrew said there, we currently spend more each year on interest payments than we do on defence, and much of the interest rates are still pretty low, and our bond rates are pretty low, so that's going to go up. But yes, reducing the size of the state is the way that we would go about it. Up till the First World War, and in fact even for periods afterwards, I don't think UK spent more than 10 or 15% of GDP was spent by government, and you would have to pay about 3% of GDP in order to start paying down the debt. So 3% of your paying would eat into the debt burden. So it is eminently doable, but it comes down to shrinking the size of the state. By bringing the state right down, you could have a state which is 10%, spends 10% of GDP instead of 40%, and you wouldn't have any difficulty in paying that debt down. But the problem is, of course, the politicians would rather spend that 3% on winning votes today than paying off the debt for tomorrow.
I'd like to know your opinion on probably one of those contentious areas of privatization, which would be the NHS, whether you would completely privatize that or still keep that a government service.
So my opinion is slightly different from the official policy of the Scottish Libertarian Party. The official policy, I believe, is that we would go towards a Netherlands style compulsory insurance policy. I personally prefer simply privatising the NHS in so much as anyone who wishes to use the service can sign up and pay money into the NHS fund, and anyone who does not and thinks they would get better value from going private can do so. And the logical result of this is very, very quickly the NHS would cease to exist, because everybody wants free healthcare, nobody wants to pay for it, nobody's going to sign up if they're going to be a payer. And the fact it's just not very efficient way of delivering it means that everybody's going to get better service elsewhere anyway. So yeah, I am in favour of flat out privatising it and not really having any regulation and requirements to do with healthcare whatsoever. The party takes a more pragmatic approach, which is we would get rid of the NHS but replace it with compulsory insurance.
Our policy is still under review and actually decided on in January. But I think the way that we're moving towards it, the fact it is a sacred cow. It's our NHS, which was a phrase actually coined by trade unions that were working there, protecting their bottoms, working inside the NHS. The whole thing was actually set up in 1945 as an insurance scheme. That's what's on the packet. It actually says it's national insurance to protect you from want, illness, and everything else. I'm a great fan of insurance schemes, even if it's one backed by government. I'm quite happy with that. But we haven't had that. We've had a Ponzi scheme. Now, if anybody else had actually run an insurance scam, and that's the only way to actually call it, like we've had over the last 70 years of the NHS, if they were directors of that insurance scam, they'd go to jail. Quite simply, the NHS never ever actually produced one building, produced one hospital. It nationalised existing provision that had been paid for by local people to build their own hospital, where the community got together, paid for the building, paid for the land, and that's all that happened. They've now built lots of new brand spanking new hospitals all over the country, which are actually done as a marvellous scheme, which is compounding the Ponzi scheme effort the whole is going by calling it PFI, Private Finance Initiative. So if I want to change that light bulb over there, it's going to cost me 700 quid, because that's the contract, because you're using private money to do that. My personal view, and this isn't part of the policy, but I'll be making my view known, is I would actually have these contracts declared illegal, basically, because they're not you've actually got a lot of dumb politicians who agree all this, because all this votes in this week to say we've built a £170 million hospital. They didn't know what they were signing. They were not compos mentis to actually sign a contract like that. It's an unfair contract. My friend the lawyer probably picked me up on that, but at the end of the day, I think we've got to do something about it, because there is more and more and more call on the NHS, and everybody wants to see the NHS national insurance staying there. But everybody I speak to on the doorstep when I'm out canvassing, it's got a horror story about the NHS. Everybody, the dirt, the filth, the nurses who don't speak English, the poor quality of nursing, the neglect. And I'm going to declare an interest here. My son died through neglect, and so did my mother after a very minor operation that could have been avoided, both of them. So you won't find me actually singing the praises of NHS, but I actually think we need to actually retain that, adopt the pragmatic view, but turn national insurance back into what it should have been day one. A national insurance scheme out with government, because they like dibbling and dabbling around in it. And that needs to be taken out and put into, well, the Bank of England is allegedly independent, but it seems to take an awful lot of instruction from the Treasury. But I would actually like to see a same sort of provision made, that it's actually the NHS and national insurance is actually taken out of the hands of grubby politicians, quite simply. I work in Africa, and to be quite honest, we've actually got Botswana that's got a fantastic constitution. One of its constitution bits about certain now, they're not allowed to spend any more than 5% on GDP on borrowing. It's in their constitution. It's the wealthiest country in Africa. And all its welfare provision is in a separate body that is not controlled by government, and they're not allowed to put their hands anywhere near it. They've got the same in Uganda, they've got the same in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone's dirt poor. I know, I'm doing work there on housing, but it's the wealthiest organisation in the country, and the government are always trying to get hold of the money. But the way their constitution is actually set up, they're forbidden to do it. Constitution's good.
As somebody who's done foreign aid work in various countries around the world, and my experiences with that is that a lot of foreign aid projects fail, not because of the projects themselves, but because of governments interfering with them. An example of this is that in Thailand they have a provision in government in which if a charity or an organisation were to build something, the government would have to legally knock it down and then rebuild it themselves, so they could have government control over it and say that they own it. So, for example, if a charity was to build a well or a school, the government would, by law, have to knock that down or replace it with a government-owned thing, so the government can then keep control over people's lives. Is this a type of thing that, as the UK spends money on foreign aid, would try to avoid or just completely replace with mutual trade?
You're going to struggle with any kind of foreign aid. I can understand, see if there's like a sudden devastating earthquake and a place is absolutely ravaged and you need immediate urgent assistance, that we could, government might dispatch Royal Navy ship there to provide medical care and urgent food or that. But the current practice we have in countries which are not immediately subject to natural disaster is pretty poor. I used to audit a number of charities, and at least one of them was an international aid charity, and despite the best intentions of the people, they were always coming up with problems in these countries. Either corruption of the local people they employed, simply nicking the staff or not doing the work, or the government, as you say, interfering. Ultimately, a lot of these aid projects, we don't even try and use a third party such as a charity, simply just throw the money at the government of that country, and it's a waste. Even if they do spend it in those countries, all it does is free up money that the governments take from its citizens to spend on weapons and oppressing them. That's what it does. When you start giving aid to these countries, like food aid, all it does is means that the government says, great, we don't have to concern ourselves with the food supply and that now. We've got all this food, we'll feed the army with it, and then we'll use the money to buy guns and ammunition. And that tends to be what happens. It's not a very good way of going about it. It has to be trade. That's ultimately what has lifted people out of poverty in the world. It has to be trade. The best export we could give them, the best gift, would be the rule of law, property rights, perhaps a constitution. And
they've got a constitution. We haven't.
But I think that's the best way forward. I really can't see.
I would like to quote the president of Ghana in a televised speech where, what's the current French president?
Oh, is this the one where he slags off Macron?
No, he didn't slag him off, and he just said, Mr. President, we don't need aid, we need trade. And this is where, having worked all over Africa and the Middle East, this is one of my fundamental objections to the EU, is the fact that you cannot, like Kenya, their coffee industry has been devastated by the EU, because you can't actually send processed coffee with value added from Kenya to Europe, because the Germans just want to have their coffee industry processing raw beans. And this is where it all goes wrong. And literally, it's a massive trade war. I've seen the poverty in Africa induced by EU trade rules, and this is the reason why our greeny friends are going, oh yes, we've got to stay in the EU because we all love each other and everything else. They're killing people and killing markets and killing industries all over the developing world.
Chat with beard.
So I've got a few questions. The first one, this is probably the easiest one to answer. What are the policies that the Libertarian Party of the UK and the Scottish Libertarian Party have in place to protect minority indigenous languages like Gaelic, Manx and Cornish and Welsh, for example?
We have no policy for that.
No policy. Fair enough. And following on with that, given you've mentioned about corporations and stuff like Facebook and stuff, silencing yourself, given the amount of interference that the state has with those companies, is it reasonable to say that they're basically an extension of the state and shouldn't be allowed to censor people and that we shouldn't use them at all?
I would refer you to what I said earlier, that having control over private corporations by the state and working hand in glove is the essence of fascism. That's what Mussolini said it was. You know, he defined that in 1923.
You raise an interesting point there. I think that under the Obama administration, they had meetings with Google on average of 2 a week throughout the time there. So they were in and out the whole time, working, you know, they were thick as thieves. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a very interesting point as to whether or not they are truly independent. I suppose we have to say, yes, they are separate entities, but the situation isn't very good. And if I'd done a talk on a different line, maybe I'd have spoken about that and about the issues we have with privileged positions, shall we say, within the legal and regulatory framework. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that they should be compelled to have some kind of public broadcaster laws like we have the BBC, where they're supposed to try and be impartial. I think they remain private, and we just kind of have to limp it.
Can I throw a question back out, which actually came back off what we were talking about earlier? Who believes in this room that we've actually got secret police?
Oh, without a doubt.
Right, for all those who haven't put their hand up and are a bit doubtful, I'll just refer you to the case of the police unit that was actually infiltrating Green activists in Nottinghamshire, who actually had married police officers actually sleeping with some of the activists. 2 of them, I think 2 or 3 were actually made pregnant, and the rest of it, and this all came flying out of the woodwork 10 years afterwards. Now, if you don't think that is right, and literally there was a bit of an outcry, but it's all died down, every one of those policemen involved just disappeared. They don't exist anymore. So that was just a small group, probably no more than 3 or 4 times the amount of people in this room. They thought the state and the police thought it was well worth infiltrating them.
So following up from the corporation point, do you think the corporation should have political power at all, or should there be absolutely no sort of money from private corporations put into government?
I think they're free to make donations. I think the way to solve any perceived problem there is by limiting the power of governments. You're not going to give any money to government if it's got no power to do you any favours. Corporations like to support regulation because the regulation is a way of regulating out of existence their competitors. And they spend a fortune lobbying. In fact, the wealthiest, I know this is a US example, but the wealthiest zip codes in America are the ones around about Washington DC where the lobbyists and politicians live. It's not Manhattan, it's not Wall Street moguls, it's not Hollywood stars, it's that area there with the lobbying, because it is worth so much to pay to get your competitor's product disqualified from the market or to get some change in regulation in your favour. If you take away the power of government to do any favours, you will cut that out, I think.
Well, corporations haven't got a vote, and I think in the UK, universities used to have a vote, but they no longer have. There's no reason why they should have a vote or any influence on public policy, because effectively it falls under the Bribery Act 2010.
I've never liked that.
No,
I don't like
I
it.
quote it all the time.
There's something called a facility.
Sorry, Mr. So-and-so, when I'm out in Africa, I can't do that. I'll be held to it.
Well, it's a good excuse for you, but I think it's really interesting. There's something called a facilitation payment, which is defined as if my goods are held up in customs, if I pay the guy to, just do your paperwork, hurry up and get it through today, give him a bit of cash to grease the wheels and make everything run smoothly, that's prohibited. I've got to be honest with you, I've never really found the difference between a facilitation payment and any tax or any official payment or anything I make to the government to allow for them to allow me to go about my business. I cannot see a distinction between it. Frankly, if I wasn't so sure the courts were being paid for by the government and would be on their side in this, I would challenge paying my road tax next time they ask for it as being a facilitation payment. I just think it's one of those instances, it's a silly piece of legislation. There'll be some good ideas in it, genuine concern in it, but as is so often, the government likes to slip in other things.
So what are the LPUK and the SLP's immigration policies in regards to, like, for example, we've had the Brexit vote and a lot of people say that's because of immigration and stuff like that. What are your specific parties' immigration policies?
So I think, if I'm right at the moment, because we are dealing with devolved administration and we're not an independent sovereign state, we wouldn't have clear immigration policy on that. The views of Stephen, is that right? We don't have an official line because we're not sovereign states, so.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've got policy that lines up with LPUK's, but Andrew's best to.
Well, our policy is quite simple. We've got a welfare state with a pull factor. There has to be immigration controls. Unfortunately, what happens is, it's the old joke. Look at all these doctors, surgeons, and engineers queuing up on these inflatables off the coast of Africa. At the end of the day, you are sucking in the poorest, and I would again lay that firmly at the feet of the EU. If they didn't actually destroy indigenous industries all over Africa, these people wouldn't be so poverty-stricken. They would risk life, death, and rape trying to get to Europe. At the end of the day, we're far better off instead of prosecuting illegal immigrants, actually, and I'm not even advocating that we go down the foreign aid route, because that just ends up in Switzerland. And I've seen it time and time again, literally, unless the aid actually gets the people on the ground, and I would, having worked out some of these places in Africa, I wouldn't give a penny to some of these international trades, because I've had a stand-up row with them where it's Comic Relief. Comic Relief was actually funding weapons in Ethiopia. Everybody was actually running around with their red nose on the rest of it. They were buying Kalashnikovs with it.
It's your Oxfam scandal.
Yeah, Oxfam was the same, and I think after the Haitian earthquake, I think something like $2 billion was actually raised to rebuild housing. 2 were built, £1 billion each it cost. Literally, it's just our money just going down a funnel. And I would rather see what the President of Ghana said is trade, not aid.
Do we have time for?
We'll have, if anyone's got one last question, and make it quick.
And in terms of this idea of ministers stripping away our liberty, would you, in your opinion, do you think that's a malicious intention to control the populace, or do you think it's a ignorant, not knowing why we have the freedoms that we do?
It's a really good question. I think there are several reasons. So first of all, one of them, SNP specific, it is the opinion of several lawyers, not just my opinion, but several senior figures in the Scots legal profession, that the Scottish office, when it was the Westminster office, wouldn't deign to alter Scots law in the way that Holyrood has within the last 10 years. The main reason behind this is that the Scottish office didn't pretend to know what was best, whereas Holyrood, they really believe that they know what is best, and SNP in particular see themselves as the voice of Scotland, the people of Scotland. So they see themselves as enacting the will, and that gives them a certain sense of divine right to change the laws in a way. So partly, it's seen as a sense of we are doing the will of the people and we are right. Other reason for it is partly malicious, I think. I think that if you look again, look in the SNP, they fundamentally don't trust people. They want to regulate everything. They just don't trust people. But even looking down at Westminster, when Conservative government, I think it was the coalition at the time, Conservative and Lib Dems, had proposed to loosen controls over what you can do with your pension money and how you can access it upon retirement. Labour came out and said, Balls came out and said, we're really concerned that people take it to spend their money on Ferraris and then we're going to have to then support them through the state. And that's the kind of attitude that, and that really is what he said, you give examples of splashing 100 grand in a flash car and then suddenly being poor. And that is the way they view people. A lot of them don't view people as being, Joe Public has been free to make and capable of making their own decisions. They just don't trust them. So they want to, it's partly that sort of a parental patronising sense. It's partly the divine right to make law sense. It is partly, some of it is that they really think they're doing a good deed, but they're ignorant, perhaps because of the divine right thing. And part of it is malicious, that they just, it's a chance to expand state power. And like the Police Scotland, that was a clear one by the SNP, because the head of Police Scotland is appointed directly by Nicola Sturgeon. So that is a case where there's a direct line and they now police the policies of the government and they no longer, as Andrew said, respond to the local communities. So some of it clearly is malicious in an attempt to drive through their own agendas, but I don't think it's all further.
If I can answer that point. I don't think that the MPs who sit in the House are malicious at all. I just think they're utterly incompetent. They are poor quality. They certainly wouldn't get a job in management anywhere. And they are just, and I'm going to have to say the word, dross. And you've just actually got a bunch of people here who are saying, we trust us with your government. And anybody who actually goes to Venezuela and says, this is the way we need to go. They are driven by dreams. They are sitting there, like Jeremy Corbyn's been there, since 1983? He's coining it in, he can just come out with any old crap. He just knows he's never ever going to get in power because nobody trusts him. And then the question, well, I firmly believe they're not malicious because they're incompetent. They don't really know what they're doing, therefore they get nice dinners, good salary, pretty good expenses for their moats and duck houses and everything else. But the people I believe, and I'll give you the evidence for this, who are malicious in this, is the permanent civil service. I've been, while just listening to Liam talking, I was scraping my brain as to what the new act is that has replaced the Emergency Powers Act. If you want to be frightened, go and read that. Because the moment there is a national emergency, be it an earthquake, flooding or anything else, or threatened atomic war, you go and read that. If you want to have a sleepless night, don't drink coffee, go and read that. The powers they've given themselves, summary execution and the rest of it, it's just dystopian beyond belief. And the good thing is that all these people, I was involved back in the early 80s in demolishing a lot of civil defence properties. We did have a civil defence up until 1969 when it was finally abolished. And literally there's all these buildings and the rest of it scattered all over the country. You and I haven't got access to that. We're going to be the ones dying of radiation poisoning and the rest of it, with some bloke who's been in a bunker 20, 30 feet beneath a load of concrete, coming out with a machine gun and telling you what to do and how to run your life. And if you don't know it, he'll shoot you out of hand. Right, so
on that note, one question. Given the amount of threats to liberty that you've both proposed, how likely do you think that a violent revolution is to sort of kick these things out?
I would quote Lord Lawson, if Brexit doesn't go through and Parliament overturns it, there'll be blood on the streets.
I would say that very famous war philosopher called von Clausewitz wrote that war is politics by other means. I would flip that around. If politics does not yield the results for you because your referendum is ignored, then you are exhausting the options, and war or violence of some description is an inevitability.
And civil war is the most bloody and violent and horrific of wars. I've actually got a good friend of mine who managed to get 2 kids out of Croatia. Nobody else is alive in that village.
No. On that solemn note.
Sleep tight, kids!
Time is precious, but what do I know? Been to places you